Today the jury has spoken, and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev will pay with his life for his crimes. Make no mistake, the defendant claimed to be acting on behalf of all Muslims. This was not a religious crime, and it certainly does not reflect true Muslim beliefs.
Having lived there for several years, I can tell you from personal experience about the resiliency of those who live in the city of Boston and New England. Boston Strong is not just a slogan, it is a reality. The Dzhokhar Tsarnaev trial has been a deep and open wound in Boston since the moment lives were extinguished on those marathon streets. Friday, when the jury came back and sentenced this killer to the death penalty, it surprised more than a few who assumed the people of New England would prefer a life sentence. That's the thing about assuming. Welcome in Boston Herald columnist and syndicated radio host Adriana Cohen. Adriana, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Were you as shocked as I was? Honestly, having lived in Boston, I really thought that this would not happen this way.
I know. I have to tell you, I was a bit surprised because, they had to get a unanimous, all 12 jurors needed to vote for the, deliver a verdict of the death penalty. And this is obviously a very liberal state. However, I think that the witness testimony is a heartbreak that the jurors had to listen to with the victims, the families who saw loved ones' legs get blown off, the death of Martin Richards, the 8-year-old boy. And then that coupled with the fact that the terrorist, the convicted terrorist, was not remorseful. And not only was he not remorseful in the courtroom, but we know that right after the marathon bombing, 2 days later, he went to a party at his college. And he went to the gym. I mean, this is a cold-hearted, cold-blooded murderer/terrorist. And so I personally don't think he regrets what he did. And if he did regret it, he certainly didn't show it, and he didn't convince the jury as such.
The other thing that caught me was right after the verdict was announced, a lot of the tweets from some of the victims, and even the victims, were saying eye for an eye. We were really led to believe by a lot of the media that even they were hoping for a life sentence, that even they did not want him put to death. That caught me off guard a little.
Right. In terms of the victims' families, some were for the death penalty, like a woman named Liz Norden. She's a mother of 2 sons that each lost a leg during the marathon bombing. She was absolutely for the death penalty, but then you could take the Richards family. They spoke out saying that they didn't want the death penalty, not out of compassion, but they basically wanted to just bury this so they could go forward with their lives, because now that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is going to get the death penalty, this will be on appeal for maybe years and years and years, and it'll continue to be a news story. So I think the victims' families, some of them were torn. But I can tell you, I speak to a lot of people. I live here in Massachusetts, and many were for the death penalty, just regular civilians. They saw what this heinous terrorist monster did to our city, and they believe it's, the verdict is just.
And I guess the one thing, too, that we have to think about is that great sigh of relief that has come out of the city of Boston today. It is fair to say that it is palpable by the people who live there. And thankfully, hopefully, this is going to be over. Despite the fact that there will be all these appeals, it at least has come to this resolution. Adriana, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Have a great evening.
All right, take care. Now let's get to the legal aspect of all of this. Let's welcome back to the Hardline veteran attorney and one of our top legal experts, Adam Thompson. Adam, we've talked about being surprised, but then again, let's face it, it seems as if the punishment does fit the crime, because certainly the pictures that we have seen, we just saw the video again, led many people to believe that this was exactly the right thing to do.
It's rare that you'll see the death penalty imposed, but if you're not going to do it in a case like this or of this magnitude, you then have to ask yourself, when? After hearing all the evidence in this case, and remember, the defense attorneys in this case came right out during the trial phase of this case and admitted he did it. So there was no doubt that he was involved and that he did these heinous acts. The only hope they had was that they wanted to spare him death in this penalty phase.
Let me get to that, Adam, if you will. Let me interrupt you here because we're short on time, but I want to get that through. Some people believe that Tsarnaev's attorneys are guilty of malpractice. They didn't put him on the stand. They didn't do a lot of things. They came right out and said that he was guilty. Do you think that they did anything wrong, or do you think that doing anything differently would have led to a different verdict here in the penalty phase?
That's a great question. And the first thing that you always think is, in the penalty phase, if the defendant really doesn't want to be put to death, who do you want to hear from to tell their version, to really let you know what their inner thoughts are? It would be the defendant. We saw it in the Jodi Arias case. She wasn't sentenced to death. He didn't take the stand. I can only think that the defense team in this case, after interviewing him, probably thought he might take the stand and then use that as a platform to further his quest to be a martyr. Because otherwise, you would let him tell how remorseful he was, how sorry he was, and apologize to the families. It never happened. And I think it didn't because he would not have said those things.
60 Minutes here. George O'Toole Jr. is the U.S. District Judge who must officially hand out the death penalty. Do you see any reason why, from what we have seen, what we have witnessed here, that he may change this verdict, that he may rule something differently when he actually applies the verdict?
Absolutely not. 1,000% he's going to impose a death penalty, and then we're going to be into appeals land, which is going to go on for a good 5 to 10 years in all likelihood.
Do you see anything in what you have seen here that would give you any hope, if you were on Tsarnaev's side, of an appeal process being in his favor?
Well, there's been close to 500 death penalty sentences handed out via federal sentences. Only 3 have been put to death, including Timothy McVeigh. So there's usually some errors that are found, some reason to reopen it and re-argue something during the course of the trial, and then sometimes they renegotiate a plea and he'll get a life sentence. Will that happen here? Who knows? I don't have the actual file in front of me to review it, but there will be errors made that will be discovered and argued.
There will be errors made, but in the minds of many, justice has indeed been served in this case. Adam Thompson, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again.
Take care, Ed.
To my friends in Boston, I'll say this as I have said every time we cover this story: Boston strong. Stay that way. The fastest 60 minutes in news continues.